Quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories, or just a hello, and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. I could barely contain my excitement when Morris asked me out on a date. We had been chatting for a few weeks after meeting online and really seemed to hit it off. He came across as so charming and funny in our messages. When he suggested meeting up in person, I immediately started daydreaming about how great it would be if we had an instant connection. After discussing our options, we decided to go to La Stella, this cozy Italian restaurant in the heartlands that I had heard rave reviews about. I took extra time getting ready, carefully picking out a cute outfit that I thought accentuated my best features. I even put on heels to give myself a bit of extra height, hoping it would put me more at eye level with Maurice's 6'0" frame. When I arrived at La Stella right on time, I scanned the room but didn't see Maurice yet. A hostess led me to our table, where I sat down and checked my phone nervously while I waited. 5 minutes later, I looked up to see a man about my height approaching the table, looking around. I stood up and waved, assuming it must be Maurice, even though he looked much shorter in person. I introduced myself cheerfully, but he responded grimly when replying. He plopped down in the seat across from me and grabbed a menu without making eye contact. I tried to shake off the awkward start and make conversation, but again his reply was grim. His eyes were glued to the menu. I pressed on, determined to give him a chance to warm up, and I was only met with one-word replies. He asked me no questions. It continued like that through multiple attempts to engage Maurice in any semblance of a two-way dialogue. By the time our food came, I had given up on getting full sentences out of him, and we were sitting in complete silence. Between bites, I tried to subtly observe him and figure out what was going on. He seemed tense, with furrowed brows and a slight scowl on his face. His leg was bouncing rapidly under the table. I started to wonder if he was uncomfortable being out with someone taller than him, even if only by a few inches. Or maybe this restaurant had been a bad choice, and he didn't actually like Italian food but felt pressured into agreeing. At one point, I made a lighthearted joke about the huge portion sizes. I got the hint of a smile, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. When the check arrived, Maurice immediately pulled out his wallet to pay. I politely suggested splitting it since I had done just as much inviting as he had. He hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly agreed to go halves. I couldn't help but feel a bit stung, even though logically I knew a first date didn't obligate either person to cover the whole bill. We walked out of the restaurant in painful silence. I considered just wishing him a good night and driving home, but then Maurice spoke up and asked if I wanted to go back to his place. I was taken aback since we hadn't discussed anything further after dinner. The idea of going to his house already seemed like a big jump when we were barely conversing. I declined as graciously as I could, but his face fell. I gave an awkward wave and speed walked to mine, shaking my head in disbelief at how terribly that date had gone. When I imagined finally meeting the guy I had been talking to for weeks, the reality could not have been further from my fantasy. I replayed the night over and over as I drove home, wondering if there was anything I could have done differently. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Maurice's lack of engagement wasn't something I could single-handedly overcome. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Maurice. That said, I don't think we're compatible. You made fun of my hair all night, which really hurt my feelings. I stared at my phone, dumbfounded. I hadn't said a single word about his hair, let alone made fun of it. But clearly he was looking for a reason to justify the date being a disaster. I considered explaining that I had done nothing of the sort, but instead I just deleted his number and blocked him on all social platforms without replying. Over the next few days, I went back through our past conversations and realized there were a few subtle red flags I had ignored. When we discussed hobbies or interests, Maurice always turned the focus back to himself. He made a couple offhand remarks about my weight that he tried to pass off as compliments. I kept giving him the benefit of the doubt, but in hindsight, his self-centeredness and insensitivity were telling signs. While the terrible first date was uncomfortable at the time, it ended up being a valuable learning experience. It reminded me not to get caught up in online chemistry and build someone up in my head before meeting them. It also reinforced that I deserve effort and engagement from a potential partner, not just surface-level charm. Most importantly, it drove home that I should trust my intuition when something feels off instead of making excuses. Dating can be frustrating and disappointing at times, but each experience, good or bad, gives me more clarity about the kind of caring, communicative partner I'm seeking. Instead of dwelling on this one awkward night, I'm choosing to take away important lessons that will better equip me for the future. I know there's someone out there who will put time and care into getting to know the real me. Until our paths cross, I'll work on being the best and happiest version of myself. One stilted date does not define me or the possibilities ahead. I had been chatting online with a guy named Dominic for a few weeks, and we really hit it off. He seemed friendly, smart, and we shared a lot of the same interests. When Dominic asked me out on an actual date, I was excited to finally meet in person. We made plans for him to come over to my apartment, have a couple drinks, and chat before heading out to dinner at a new restaurant I had been wanting to try. This was our first time meeting offline after meeting online, so I had some nervous butterflies but tried to tell myself there was no reason to worry. The day of the date arrived, and I spent extra time cleaning and tidying up my apartment. I even stopped by the store on the way home from work to pick up some flowers and decorative candles to make the place look nice. As the hour of Dominic's scheduled arrival approached, I freshened up my makeup and fluffed my hair, wanting to look perfect. Right on time, there was a knock at my door. I went in to find a tall, muscular guy with short brown hair grinning back at me. "Hey, I'm Dominic. Nice to finally meet you in person," he said enthusiastically as I welcomed him inside. He looked just like the photos from his dating profile, if not even a bit cuter. We sat down on the couch and I got us both a glass of wine while we chatted about mundane things like work and funny stories from our weeks. Dominic was just as charming and quick-witted as he had seemed online. After we finished our first glass, he complimented my decor and asked if he could see more of my place. As I showed him around the apartment, we continued laughing together and learning little details about each other's lives. About 20 minutes after he had arrived, Dominic asked if he could use my bathroom. I said of course, and pointed him down the hallway to the restroom. I tidied up the wine glasses and checked myself in the mirror one more time as I waited for him to return. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I started to wonder if he was okay or got lost. Just as I was debating whether to check on him, Dominic emerged from the hallway looking flushed. He apologized for taking so long and asked if he could have 15 more minutes in the bathroom before we headed to dinner. I thought it was an odd request, but said that was fine, and I would be waiting in the living room when he was ready. I scrolled through my phone and replied to a few texts from friends asking how the date was going so far. After just a minute or two had passed, I was surprised to see Dominic swiftly walking back down the hall carrying a small scale and some tiny plastic baggies. My heartbeat quickened anxiously when I saw him pull a large bag of white powder out of his jacket pocket. Without saying a word to me, he began calmly pouring portions of the substance up onto the scale, carefully measuring them and funneling the piles into the baggies. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what was happening. The friendly, charming guy I had invited into my home was a drug dealer, using my own bathroom to package up his products. I froze in disbelief, unsure what to do next. I felt afraid to confront him or ask him to leave. Dominic was much larger than me and I didn't know how he might react, but I also felt terrified of the thought of illegal drugs being prepared in my apartment. My limbs were paralyzed by the adrenaline and panic flooding my system. After what felt like an eternity of blankly staring at Dominic quietly bagging the white powder, I suddenly snapped back to reality. I knew I needed to be brave and take control of this situation. I stood up and firmly asked Dominic to gather his things immediately and leave my apartment at once. I tried to keep my voice calm despite the anxiety building up inside me. Dominic's head jerked up and he looked at me with surprise, as if just remembering I was still there. "Whoa, relax. This will just take a few more minutes," he replied casually. He continued scooping powder into the baggies like it was no big deal. I repeated my request with even more conviction that he needed to leave right now. We could forget all about the date and dinner plans. After a tense minute or two of back and forth, Dominic finally realized I was serious. With a sigh and shake of his head, like I was the one acting unreasonable, he gathered up his scale, remaining powder, and bagged products. I followed closely behind as Dominic walked to the front door. I felt immense relief as I locked the door firmly behind him. My whole body was shaking in the aftermath. I kept peering out the window, irrationally worried he might come back angry. I could hardly believe this was the same charming guy I had been talking to for weeks online. That illusion was now shattered. For the rest of the evening, I could barely eat anything as I replayed the terrifying encounter over and over again in my mind. What if Dominic had become violent when I asked him to leave? What if he had slipped something into my drink when I wasn't looking? My apartment no longer felt like the safe haven it once was. Over the next few days, I became consumed with scrubbing every inch of the bathroom, plagued by paranoid thoughts that Dominic had left traces of the powder behind. I knew if police found it, I could get in serious trouble. I also started double-checking that my door was locked at all times and jumped at small noises I wouldn't have noticed before. I realized my sense of security had been severely damaged after allowing a dangerous stranger into my private space. In the following weeks, I became much more cautious about who I agreed to meet in person after interacting online. I would only choose public places and make sure friends knew where I was. It took me a long time to rebuild my confidence and not feel anxious about new dates. I kept imagining worst-case scenarios. This experience taught me a tough lesson about being vigilant with online strangers. You truly never know another person's intentions until they are in your home. I will never again make the mistake of assuming an online connection means someone is safe in the real world. I was filled with nervous excitement as I got ready for my first date with James. We had matched on a dating app a few weeks prior and had been chatting regularly since then. When he mentioned his birthday was coming up, I spontaneously offered to take him out to dinner to celebrate. After going back and forth on restaurants, we settled on a trendy rooftop spot downtown that came highly recommended. The day of the date, I took extra care getting ready, gently curling my hair and applying a touch more makeup than usual. I chose a flattering floral print dress and strappy heels to match. I wanted to look nice but not overdressed. As I was putting the final touches on my lipstick, James texted that he was on the way to pick me up. Punctuality was a good first sign, I thought. I greeted James warmly when he arrived, and he came around to open the car door for me. Another promising start. As we drove to the restaurant, we chatted about mundane things like work and the weather. James seemed a little distracted, checking his phone periodically, but I figured he was just nervous too. We arrived at the trendy restaurant on the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise. The hostess greeted us enthusiastically and whisked us away to a small table right near the edge of the roof. The views of the cityscape were stunning and romantic music played softly in the background. A server came by quickly to take our drink order. I asked for a glass of white wine, and James requested an old-fashioned. As I glanced over the menu, I tried gently asking James questions about his job, hobbies, interests. But his responses were clipped, his eyes darting to his phone every few minutes as alerts lit up on the screen. I started to feel a bit discouraged, but tried not to overanalyze. Maybe he was just shy or slow to open up on a first date. The drinks arrived, and I took a grateful sip of crisp, cool wine. But just then, I noticed James reaching for his old-fashioned, eyes still glued to his phone screen instead of looking at his glass. Inevitably, he knocked the drink over, spilling whiskey and bitters across our small table. I recoiled, moving my purse to avoid splatter. Before I even had time to react, our server swooped in with a towel, apologizing profusely for the accident. But just as she went to start wiping up the spill, James held up a hand. "Don't worry about it, I got this," he said, finally setting his phone down. To my complete shock, he then proceeded to run his index finger through the pool of spilled whiskey, collecting as much liquid as possible before licking it clean with an exaggerated slurp. "Can I get my money's worth here?" he said with a smirk and wink. I sat there, stunned into silence. The server also paused, seeming unsure what to do next. An awkward beat passed before she asked if we needed anything else. I murmured no thank you without meeting her eye, thoroughly mortified by James' behavior. With the spill cleaned up, I tried once again to engage James in conversation. I asked about his friends, if he had any fun plans for his birthday weekend, but my efforts were futile. After responding with one or two words, his attention inevitably returned to the phone in front of him. His eyes were glued to the screen and thumbs moved rapidly as he carried on multiple text conversations. I sipped my wine slowly, keeping my gaze fixed on the twinkling city lights and trying not to let my irritation show. This was not at all how I imagined my first date with James going. I had pictured laughing conversation over a delicious meal, getting to know each other better. But instead I was sitting in uncomfortable silence across from someone completely absorbed by their phone. The server returned to see if we wanted to order any food. Before I could respond, James dismissively waved her away, eyes never leaving his phone. I placed my napkin on the table, the message clear: we would not be dining together tonight. I finally broke the silence to gently suggest we call it a night. James glanced up briefly, shrugging in indifference. Yeah, I should get going soon anyway. was all he mustered before returning to his phone once more. I quickly signaled for the check and paid the bill, despite my offer to treat James for his birthday. He was clearly no longer interested in having dinner with me. James gathered his things and followed me wordlessly to my car. The drive to his place was painfully quiet, with only the glow of his phone screen illuminating the darkness. I pulled up outside James' home, feeling relieved this disastrous date was finally over. As he opened the passenger door to exit, he casually offered a "see ya around" before slamming the door shut without so much as a thank you or goodbye. I drove home disheartened, replaying the terrible evening in my mind. I couldn't believe I had wasted time and money on someone so rude and self-absorbed. In hindsight, the signs were all there: his distracted demeanor, constant phone checking, disinterest in conversing. I was determined to be more selective moving forward when it came to online dating. That night was a lesson learned about paying attention to red flags early on. James showed his true colors on that first date, and they were far from charming. I deleted his number from my phone, eager to forget the man who slurped spilled whiskey off a restaurant table and paid more attention to his phone than his date. What an utter disaster and waste of an evening that was. At least now I knew what I did not want in a potential partner. The day I met Lisa for our first date is seared into my memory. It started out so normally, just a regular first date between two people who had met online. We picked a casual Italian restaurant downtown that had just opened up. I got there a little early and slid into the booth to wait. A few minutes later, I saw Lisa bounce in, radiating nervous excitement. She scanned the restaurant, saw me, and broke into a huge smile. She rushed over and slid into the seat across from me. "Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to finally meet you," she gushed. I smiled back politely and said it was nice to meet her too. The waiter came over for our drink order. As soon as he left, Lisa immediately launched into rapid-fire small talk. She was chatting a mile a minute about how thrilled she was for this date, how perfect I seemed based on our messages, and how she just knew we would hit it off. I tried to interject a few times to actually get to know her, but she barreled right on through. It was a little overwhelming, but I figured she was just nervous for the date. We all handle first date jitters differently, so I gently steered the conversation to her job, her hobbies. Safe first date fare. That's when things started getting on. I mentioned I like hiking on weekends, and she immediately said, "Oh, on that trail up on the ridge, right? You've talked about how it's your favorite spot." I was thrown. I definitely hadn't told her the name or location of the trail. It was a bit remote, and not many people knew about it. I asked how she knew about it, and she just laughed it off, saying she must have gotten lucky guessing. A few minutes later, she brought up my college roommate, Nick, who I hadn't spoken to in years. "You and Nick had some crazy times at school. He seems like a riot." I just stared at her for a moment. I knew for a fact I had never mentioned Nick to her before. The personal details kept coming throughout the date, each one more unsettling. The hole-in-the-wall Thai place I always ordered takeout from. The fact that I took my coffee black with 2 sugars. The name of my childhood best friend who had moved abroad. An indie band I saw in college that broke up ages ago. With each new revelation, Lisa would just casually laugh or shrug it off when I expressed confusion. "Oh, I'm just good at reading people, I guess." But her excuses were starting to wear thin. I point-blank asked how she knew things I had never told her. She leaned forward, eyes intensely locked on mine, and said, "I just feel like I know you better than anyone else. We have this connection, you know. We're meant to be." I felt my chest tighten with anxiety. This was quickly going from awkward to scary. I tried to keep my cool and delicately pumped the brakes, saying we had only just met. I needed to get through this date in one piece before doing anything drastic, but inside I was freaking out. When the check came, I practically lunged for it. Liza protested and suggested we get dessert or coffee, but I insisted I had an early morning. I threw down cash, perhaps a bit rudely, and hurried to put on my coat. Just as I turned to leave, Lisa grabbed my wrist hard. The desperate, frantic look in her eyes chilled me. She begged me not to go. I gently but firmly pulled my arm free, muttering vague promises about texting soon. I hightailed it out of that restaurant so fast I left skid marks. It wasn't until I got home and locked the door behind me that it all crashed down. Lisa had been stalking me, both online and in real life. For who knows how long, she had been cataloging intimate details about me without my knowledge. I felt violated and terrified. Immediately, I blocked Lisa on all platforms and messaging apps, but the fear lingered. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I walked or drove, convinced I would see Lisa lurking nearby. I took different routes and switched out my routine. I avoided going out alone at night. I realized if I saw her again, I would have to call the police. Thankfully, our paths never crossed again. Maybe reality had finally sunk in for Lisa and she moved on. I'll never know just how deep her obsession went, and I'm grateful for that. The tiny glimpse I got was disturbing enough. I barely slept that night, my mind racing over all the what ifs. What if Lisa had turned violent when I tried to leave the restaurant? What if she followed me home? I couldn't shake the icy realization that I had been completely helpless against someone so unhinged. Ever since, I am much more cautious when meeting someone new. Lisa had seemed so nice online, but revealed herself to be menacing and deranged in real life. It was a harrowing reminder that first impressions can be deceiving. Monsters can hide behind friendly faces. Now make sure to meet any online matches in very public places and look for red flags. No more giving personal details freely before I truly know someone. My trust in others had been shaken. But I suppose that's the price of a first date from hell. I was really looking forward to my date with Chelsea. We had matched on a dating app a few weeks prior and had been chatting back and forth ever since. She came across as bright, kind, and exactly my type based on our messages. We made plans to meet up for drinks at a trendy bar not far from my apartment. As the day of our date approached, I admit I felt some first date jitters. It had been a while since I'd been out with someone new. I took extra time getting ready, making sure my outfit and hair looked just right. I knew first impressions mattered a lot, especially on a first date. I wanted Chelsea to walk in and see me and think, wow, he's even cuter than his pictures. When I arrived at the bar, I did a quick scan but didn't see Chelsea yet. I checked my watch and noted I was a few minutes early. The hostess led me to a small high-top table towards the back. I drubbed my fingers nervously on the table, watching the entrance for Chelsea's arrival. Right on time, I saw a tall, slender blonde walk in that fit Chelsea's description. She spotted me and waved. As she strode over, I took in just how gorgeous she was. Sparkling green eyes, dazzling smile, curves in all the right places. Suddenly my nerves vanished, replaced by eagerness. We exchanged slightly awkward hellos and settled into our seats across from each other. Almost instantly, we fell into easy, spirited conversation. We were totally in sync, chatting and laughing nonstop about everything under the sun. She was just as witty and magnetic in person as she'd been over text. As the drinks kept flowing, I started to feel buzzed in more ways than one. The alcohol combined with the natural high of the date clearly going so well. Never had I felt such an instant connection with someone. It seemed Chelsea and I shared so many interests: books, movies, hiking, cooking, you name it. Was this what they called meeting your soulmate? After 2 hours of talking, I worked up the courage to ask Chelsea to dinner. I didn't want this magical date to end yet. To my delight, she happily agreed to extend our night further. We walked over to a cozy Italian restaurant nearby. The effortless conversation continued as we nibbled on breadsticks and sipped Chianti. I was on cloud nine, thinking this woman could truly be the one. Everything just seemed to click with Chelsea. I couldn't remember the last time I'd enjoyed a first date so much. Surely this was a sign we were completely compatible. As we waited for dessert, I let my mind wander to thoughts of the many more wonderful dates to come. But then, everything changed in an instant. Out of nowhere, Chelsea mentioned her ex-boyfriend Carl. At first, she simply made a passing comment about what a mistake dating him had been. No big deal, I thought. Being hung up on an ex was pretty common. I didn't think much of it. However, Chelsea wouldn't let the Carl talk go. She kept bringing him up again and again. How controlling he had been during their relationship. How jealous and possessive. How she felt smothered with him, and it was part of why they broke up. With each new anecdote, I felt more uncomfortable. It seemed Chelsea was harboring some very raw, unresolved feelings about her ex. I shifted awkwardly in my seat, wishing I could gently guide the conversation back to something lighter and not involving Carl. But Chelsea was on a roll venting her dirty laundry. I nodded and smiled politely, trying to hide my unease. In my gut, I sensed this didn't bode well. Maybe Chelsea still had feelings for Carl after all. It made me question if she was truly ready and available to date someone new. I hesitated, wondering if I should politely call it a night. But before I could plan my exit strategy, Chelsea's ex-Carl himself suddenly appeared at our table, looking upset and agitated. My jaw nearly hit the floor. Wait, was Carl here? Spying on us? How did he even know we were on this date? I looked at Chelsea for some sign of shared shock or outrage at Carl's clearly uninvited arrival. But instead, she had a satisfied cat ate the canary grin. With dawning horror, I realized this was no accident. Chelsea had coordinated this entire bizarre scenario. Carl immediately launched into yelling about how could Chelsea go on a date right in front of him and try to make him jealous. Meanwhile, I sat there slack-jawed, feeling like a deer caught in headlights, or an antelope who had accidentally stumbled into two lions fighting over territory. It dawned on me that Chelsea had intentionally orchestrated this date to toy with Carl, hoping to rekindle his interest in her. I was just an unwitting pawn in her twisted schemes. My cheeks burned with humiliation. Carl's shouting quickly attracted unwanted gawkers. The manager hustled over, demanding Carl leave immediately before he called the cops. Carl then turned his fury on me, swearing I'd regret the day I ever looked at his girl. I felt my whole body tense up, certain I was about to get punched, but Carl just glared menacingly one last time before storming away. I exhaled in shaky relief. When I turned back to Chelsea, she had the gall to wink and say smugly that went well. I was utterly dumbfounded. This woman was clearly deranged, still hung up on her ex and using innocent guys like me as props in her drama-filled love life. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I threw some cash on the table and dashed outside without a backwards glance. My pulse was racing as I hustled down the dark street. I kept checking behind me, worried Carl might leap out from the shadows to attack me in retaliation. What if he was lurking nearby, waiting to finish our earlier confrontation? By the time I reached my apartment, I was thoroughly rattled. I triple-locked the door and peered through the peephole, half expecting to see Carl standing there. Finally assured I was safe, I sank down on my couch with my head in my hands. My heart ached with disappointment. I'd been so excited for this date, only to have it implode so spectacularly. Getting trapped in the dysfunctional drama of someone else's failed relationship was like becoming an unwitting character in a cringe rom-com. I deleted Chelsea's number, wanting no further contact after the nightmare she'd put me through. Despite the first date from Pal, I tried not to become jaded about dating. My dream girl was out there somewhere. I just had to live through a lot more crummy dates and encounters with oddballs before I found her. But next time, I'd definitely be vetting my dates a little more thoroughly online before meeting up in person. It was supposed to be a simple first date, a chance for me, Kevin, to get to know Alice a little better. We had matched on a dating app a few days ago, and the initial conversation had gone well. She seemed charming, intelligent, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. When she suggested meeting up for dinner, I was cautiously optimistic. The date started off well enough. We met at a cozy little Italian restaurant, and as we settled into our seats, Alice seemed relaxed and friendly. We made small talk, discussing our backgrounds, our interests, and our hopes for the future. I told her about my job as an accountant and how I enjoyed the satisfaction of balancing the books and bringing order to financial chaos. She said she was a nurse at the local hospital, drawn to helping and healing others, though the long hours could be exhausting. As we compared notes on our families and friends, on the cities we lived in, and our favorite books and TV shows, everything was going smoothly, and I felt myself starting to relax and enjoy her company. However, as the conversation progressed during the appetizer and our main courses arrived, I began to notice subtle signs that something was off about Alice's behavior. She would occasionally let out a sudden, inappropriate burst of laughter, which would trail off just as quickly as if it started. The way she did it was unsettling, as if she found amusement in something that was not at all funny. When I asked her what was so funny, she just shook her head and changed the subject. Then she started sharing stories from her past that were deeply unsettling. As we ate our meals, she casually mentioned an incident from her childhood where she had accidentally hurt a small animal. She described stumbling upon a rabbit caught in a trap in the woods behind her house and beating it with a stick, fascinated by the sound of its bones cracking under her blows. The disturbing flat effect in her tone as she recounted this made my skin crawl. There was no remorse or empathy, just a matter-of-fact description of deliberate cruelty that chilled me. As the meal went on, Alice's comments became even more disturbing. She spoke casually of her fascination with serial killers, how she marveled at their ability to blend in and remain undetected as they carry out meticulous plans. She talked admiringly of their cool nerve, keeping their lives tidy and orderly even as they orchestrated complex rituals of stalking, abduction, torture, and murder. She mused that it would require remarkable self-control and compartmentalization to live such a double life. I felt my stomach churn as I listened to her, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had completely misjudged this woman. Was she simply someone with a morbid curiosity, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? The way she spoke with such chilling detachment about horrific acts of violence left me increasingly unsettled. As we waited for the check, Alice made a few offhand remarks about how easy it would be to seriously hurt someone if you really wanted to, if you planned it out carefully. She speculated about all the random opportunities we have to injure others during the day, in small but life-altering ways. Her musings took on an increasingly ominous edge. I found myself constantly on edge, worried that she might suddenly lash out or do something unpredictable. I tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics like weekend plans, movies we'd seen, childhood pets. But Alice seemed to have a knack for dragging it back to darker subjects. She would get a strange glint in her eyes when discussing mayhem and cruelty, letting out that sudden burst of eerie laughter. The contrast between her initial charm and emerging menace left me deeply unsettled. As we left the restaurant, I knew that I needed to get away from Alice as soon as possible. I politely declined her suggestion of going for a walk or getting drinks somewhere else, citing an early meeting the next day. She seemed disappointed but didn't press the issue. I let a silent sigh of relief as we said goodbye at the curve and parted ways. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about Alice's behavior and the things she had revealed on what was supposed to be a simple first date. The experience had left me rattled, and I kept replaying details of our conversations, the callous way she had described violence, her inappropriate laughter, and fascinated obsession with harming others. I felt grateful to have made it through dinner without further incident, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I had narrowly avoided a far more dangerous situation with someone whose affable facade concealed something malignant and violent. That night, as I tried to fall asleep, I kept seeing Alice's face, flashing between the charming smile she greeted me with to the chilling grin that spread across her face when discussing cruelty and death. I wondered if I should contact the dating app administrators and warn them about her, worried what she might be capable of as she met up with someone more trusting or vulnerable. Over the next few days, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Alice suddenly reappear. I knew it wasn't likely as we hadn't exchanged contact information beyond the dating app, but I couldn't seem to stop anticipating some further sinister encounter. In the end, the date with Alice had been the most harrowing and unsettling experience of my life. She had revealed a fascination with harming others that went beyond morbid curiosity into something pathological and dangerous. I kept asking myself if this was just a series of disturbing yet isolated comments, or if they hinted at the capacity for real violence lurking within her. I hoped I would never have to find out. One positive aspect was that the experience made me much more cautious and discerning when it came to meeting strangers online. I realized I needed to trust my instincts. That initial pit in my stomach unease when Alice described harming the rabbit should have been a red flag to gently end the date earlier. Still, I tried to remind myself that most people are not secretly deranged sociopaths, and with some prudent precautions, I could get back out there into the dating scene. In the meantime, looking into getting a home security system seemed like a wise investment. The harrowing first date with Alice was a lesson learned, though at a heavy cost of emotional turmoil. I hoped in time the memory of her eerie laughter and disturbing confessions would fade, even if they lingered as a reminder that we cannot ever fully know someone after just one meeting. Until I was ready to try dating again, keeping company with normal, kind people I already knew was a comfort, helping erase the lingering unease left by my encounter with the facets of evil that can hide in plain sight. I was brimming with excitement as I got ready for my date with Neil. We had matched online a few weeks ago and had really hit it off messaging each other every day since. His dating profile picture showed a rugged, athletic guy with warm brown eyes and a kind smile that made my heart flutter. According to his profile, he was a cardiologist who enjoyed hiking, reading historical fiction, and trying new ethnic restaurants, which perfectly aligned with my own interests. Our messages had flowed so naturally it felt like we'd known each other for years. Neil was articulate, funny, and seemed genuinely thoughtful whenever I shared details about my life. I started imagining all the fun dates we could go on together, feeling like I had finally found someone special. So when he suggested meeting for dinner at a trendy new Spanish tapas place downtown, I eagerly said yes. As the big day approached, my jittiness grew. I took extra time getting ready, blow-drying my long hair pinned straight, and meticulously applying makeup. I decided on a flirty floral dress and strappy heels, wanting to look like his profile pictures brought to life. On the drive over, I cranked up my favorite empowering girl jams, giddily rehearsing imagined conversations in my head. When I arrived at the restaurant right on time, I paused to take a deep breath and smooth my dress before going inside. My heart was already racing as I scanned the lively room, wondering if Neil had arrived yet. A hostess greeted me cheerfully and led me to a cozy corner booth. I slid in and busied myself checking my phone so I wouldn't seem anxious, willing my leg to stop bouncing under the table. After about 10 minutes, I started to worry I'd gotten the time wrong or he was late. But just then, a tall man with glasses and a receding hairline entered and glanced around uncertainly. When we made eye contact, his face lit up and he waved, walking over. "Are you Dina? I'm Neil. So nice to finally meet you," he said warmly as he sat across from me. I froze for a second, confused. This was definitely not the ruggedly handsome man from the dating profile pictures. The man sitting in front of me was at least 20 years older, with a slight potbelly straining against his ill-fitting button-down shirt. His glasses magnified eyes that darted around, not me, my gaze. I tried not to let my dismay show on my face and politely replied that it was nice to meet him too. An awkward silence descended as we both looked at the menus. My mind was swirling, unsure what to think. Why did he look nothing like his pictures? Was this even the same Neil I had been talking to? When the server arrived for our drink order, I quietly asked Neil to confirm his last name along with my wine choice. He provided the same last name we had been using messaging, seeming caught off guard. As he fumbled through ordering a beer, I knew this unfortunately must be the same person. After the server left, I delicately brought out that he looked different than I expected. Neil forced an uneasy laugh and explained the pictures on his dating profile were old, saying he really should change them. I nodded slowly as if I believed him, though warning bells were now clanging in my mind. We made painfully awkward small talk about the weather until our drinks arrived. I took a big sip of wine for liquid courage before gently prodding him with a few questions to test his truthfulness. When I asked where he worked, he grew visibly flustered and vaguely mentioned changing hospitals recently. I named a few in the area, but he just said he preferred not to discuss work. Trying a different approach, I steered the conversation toward his listed interests like hiking and reading. But again, he gave strange, ambiguous answers devoid of any real details, growing increasingly anxious and evasive. The more we talked, the more inconsistencies and half-truths piled up. It was clear now that he had lied about almost everything in his profile. By the time our food arrived, I was thoroughly creeped out being alone with this stranger who had completely misrepresented himself online. Why go to such elaborate lengths to deceive me? As he rambled on about some story, I discreetly slipped my pepper spray from my purse into my lap just in case, nodding along politely while plotting my exit. During a lull, I point-blank asked him why he had lied about so many things on his dating profile. Neil turned beet red, sputtering excuses about wanting to make a good impression. I kept my expression neutral despite my pounding heart. I needed to get out of there right away. Just then, Neil abruptly stood up, saying he had to use the restroom. I tersely nodded and watched him walk away, body tensed and ready to leave. But several minutes passed, then 10, then 15. He still hadn't returned. At this point, I was certain he must have sneaked out the back to escape me. I quickly flagged down our server and asked if she had seen where the man I was with had gone. With an ominous tone, she said he had not come back this way and must have left the restaurant altogether. My anger flared, realizing I had been ditched to avoid further questioning. I paid for my untouched food and rushed out, hands shaking with adrenaline. My mind swirled during the drive home as I replayed the bizarre, unsettling evening. What kind of person puts so much meticulous effort into deception? Was I just unlucky, or were there other women who had been lured in by his false persona? In the following days, I felt plagued by paranoia, embarrassed at being so easily duped. I became hyper-vigilant, analyzing every new match profile for clues of dishonesty. But in time, the lingering unease from that deception faded. I regained faith that genuinely kind people existed out there. For now, I decided to only meet dates in person first, protecting my heart until I was sure, and I vowed to trust my instincts if anything ever seemed off again. I still get chills down my spine when I think back to my horrifying first date with Ben. When we first connected online, he seemed totally normal, charming, sophisticated, and intelligent. His dating profile painted a picture of a polished, gentlemanly guy. He said he enjoyed reading classic literature, going to art museums, and trying new cuisines. His photos showed him well-dressed at elegant restaurants and traveling to exotic destinations. I was excited when he asked me out to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown for our first in-person meeting. After a week of friendly messaging online, I felt that I had a sense of who Ben was and was looking forward to getting to know him better. I took time getting ready for our date, making sure my long brown hair fell in perfect waves and putting on a new dress I had picked out just for the occasion. I could feel butterflies in my stomach as the Uber drove me to the restaurant. Ben had chosen a trendy farm-to-table place I'd been wanting to try. When I arrived, the hostess led me to a cozy table near the back per my request. I let her know I was meeting someone and then waited nervously, checking my phone each time the door opened. A few minutes later, I saw Ben enter the restaurant. He scanned the room purposefully until he made eye contact with me. His face lit up with a warm, gracious smile, and he strode over confidently to our table. I stood up to greet him, and he gave me a gentle hug before we both sat down. I noticed as he settled in that he had already ordered a glass of red wine for himself, which was waiting at his place setting. He slid the glass toward himself and took an elegant sip, then turned his full attention to me. Ben maintained his gracious demeanor as he asked me thoughtful questions about my job as an interior designer, my close-knit family back home, and my hobbies like tennis and travel. He was an intent listener, making eye contact and nodding as I spoke. I started to relax and open up, enjoying the flow of genuine conversation. Ben appeared charming, polished, and completely normal, just as I expected for our interactions online. When the waiter came by, we ordered appetizers and entrees. I was feeling pleased with how well everything was going so far. This guy really seemed to have potential. It was after the food arrived that things took a turn. I had commented on how delicious the grilled shrimp appetizer was. Ben nodded in agreement and replied that he had grilled plenty of shrimp in his time, as well as other types of meat. He went on to casually mention that one of his hobbies was taxidermy. I must have looked taken aback, because he quickly added that it was a true art form to perfectly preserve deceased animals by expertly stuffing and mounting them. As we ate, Ben enthused about his taxidermy skills in meticulous detail, the specialized tools and chemicals he used, the care needed in each step of the process, his favorite types of animals to work on. He described spending hours posing the stiff limbs of rodents and birds into lifelike positions. This morbid pastime was clearly a passion of his, which he had been pursuing in his spare time for many years now. He talked proudly of the large collection of preserved animals he had amassed so far. Listening to him describe his unsettling hobby with such zeal turned my stomach. I pushed away my half-eaten plate of food, but worse details were yet to come. Ben went on to explain that in addition to taxidermy, he also enjoyed collecting personal mementos from the women he dated. Small, intimate things, a hair clip, a lost earring, even strands of hair. He would take these keepsakes home and catalog them, adding meaning to his relationships. My body tensed up, and I felt a cold dread wash over me as I sensed where this was leading. In that moment, I knew I needed to get as far away from Ben as possible. While he seemed oblivious to my horror, I realized he was not just a peculiar eccentric. He was potentially dangerous and depraved. Who knew how far his creepy, obsessive behaviors might go? I had to find a way to safely extract myself from this nightmare first date immediately. I suddenly told Ben I wasn't feeling well, that I must have eaten something bad earlier that was disagreeing with me. I apologized profusely and said I thought I'd better go home and rest up. I could see disappointment written clearly across his face, but he did not protest. Ben paid the check and silently walked me to my car. I felt overwhelming relief as I pulled out of the parking lot and hurried down the street, putting distance between us. When I got home, I blocked Ben's number and deleted him from all my dating profiles, removing any trace of our connection. The bizarre and alarming experience had rattled me to the core, and I vowed to be far more selective and cautious when meeting men online again in the future. Ben had initially presented himself as a refined gentleman, not at all the type of individual I imagined having such depraved and creepy obsessions. I considered myself extremely fortunate to have escaped our date unharmed before becoming part of his disturbing collection of personal trophies. Ever since that traumatic evening, I've warned my other single female friends to be vigilant about who they choose to meet in person, especially when first getting to know someone online. My horror story stands as a cautionary tale that you can never be too careful. Things are not always as they appear at first. There are unsavory, dangerous characters lurking behind benign online profiles, disguising themselves as charming suitors. Going forward, I've realized I need to listen to my instincts and be ready to get out of any situation that starts to feel off. While I'm thankful my perceptiveness prevented me from ending up as one of Ben's victims, I still shudder when I recall that horrifying first date experience. The memory serves as a reminder to always put my personal safety first when interacting with strangers from the internet who seem normal at first, but may turn out to be disturbed individuals hiding in plain sight. Proceeding cautiously could mean the difference between a fun date or a total nightmare. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.